Hello everyone, this is Sonia Byers, CEO of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Here we uncover how the intersection of identities produces different experiences for different people. While some identities may be more privileged due to their class, race, gender or faith, others may experience inordinate discrimination. Join us as we hear from the Women in Transport and take an inspiring and analytical lens through which we will understand how power and privilege interface and cross over.
And thank you everybody so much for making the time to join us for this episode of the Women in Transport podcast, where we were talking about all things Pride. Before we get into the depths of our conversation, I'd love us to all do introductions.
Thank you very much, Melissa Reynard. My job title is Project Director for COWI. I'm currently the Delivery Director for a joint venture called ASC on HS2. So this is my first time I can say I am a woman in transport. So I'm delighted to meet you all. And that's it from me. Thanks, Shireen.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Brown. My pronouns are he, him. I am the chair of Outbounds, which is Transport for London's LGBTQ plus colleague network group. And that feels like it takes up most of my life currently, as it's Pride Month, but I also do have a day job. So I work in strategic delivery and change, essentially looking for more efficient ways and continuously improving what we do. So just to explain, I guess, why I'm here, TfL hosted the Women in Transport Spring Gala back in the spring, and I met you, Shireen, on the panel. I was doing the Q&A, so that was my kind of in. So I'm just absolutely privileged to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Taylor. I work for National Highways and I'm a member of their Rainbow Roads committee, so I sit on their LGBT network. My day job is I'm a senior communications manager looking after major roads and infrastructure projects. So very much woman in transport, been a woman in transport for some time. So it's lovely to be on the podcast. Thank you for having me.
Hi, my name's Saima. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Change and Communications at Birmingham Pride. And my journey within the Pride movement began when I became the first queer Muslim woman to lead a Pride parade in Birmingham. And that was a result of people from my community who were protesting outside schools against LGBT inclusive education.
And co-hosting with me today, we have Charlie.
Hello, full name Charlie Barnes, preferred pronouns she, her, or they, them. I'm currently a project lead at UK Power Networks, working consumer vulnerability. However, my background's actually in the bus industry. I've been a passionate member and volunteer of Women in Transport for many years, which is why I'm here and kind of still part of the bus sector. In part, 'cause I'm also a trustee on the board of Bus Users UK, a charity that represents the interests of bus users across the country.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm Shireen Ali Khan, intersectionality lead for Women in Transport, and my pronouns are she, her. So let's get into it. Let's talk about belonging. It's my first question is, what does it mean in the workspace, your personal life, professional life, everything as a human being? What does it really mean to feel like you belong in a space?
I'm happy to kick that off, Shireen, if you like. I think we met some time ago, but you first listened to me present on, I think it was Black History Month, but we were also wanting to touch some of the wider diversity and inclusion matters. And I declared at the age of 50, this was the first role that I'd walked into where I decided that I wanted to declare my true self at work, share that I had a partner who was female, and I'd lived like that for some time. And I think there's many reasons why you decide to be private at work and be a bit more open outside of work. But taking that to one side, I think that has allowed me for the first time to truly belong at work, be open, connect with people much better, talk about what I'm doing at home without having to sort of check myself and be a bit more private. So yeah, if for me, a sense of belonging, I've found it much too late in life at work by just making that move to just be more open about my personal life, and it's made a huge difference to me personally, and also I think it's made a big difference at work. With I certainly get much different quite different feedback now around how I am at work, and what I'm like to work with. So I think I've found my sense of belonging from a work perspective by, finally opening up my true self. So
thank you. And is there a reason why you got to a certain point in your life and career and you thought, this is who I am now? What was it, pre that point that got you there?
Yeah, I think I had witnessed, like I'm sure a lot of people have, sort of quite overt, difficult homophobic conversations that comments would have not directed at me, but generally, earlier on in my life, which made me hesitant to be sort of defined as a gay woman. So I decided, taken the decision that I didn't want to do that, because I felt like that's how I'd be defined, which, as you grow older, you change. And I think, things changed in my personal life. I had some losses that gave me some context, and just thought, do you know what? I've had enough of this. It's time to, I'm probably fearful of a lot of things I don't need to be. And really, why should I be living my life thinking about, other people who haven't got quite so much of an open-minded point of view? So yeah, I think that was my probably age, and losing a couple of people close to me was what made the change to me.
Thank you for being so open with that. Would anyone else like to come in?
Yeah, I can resonate with that as a woman who's come out later in life. So I didn't come out until 29. My background is marketing and communications. I've worked at the BBC, Royal Shakespeare Company, and in financial services as well. So I am used to corporate spaces. When it comes to belonging for me, though, as a woman of colour in leadership, it's very difficult, because there's so many intersections that I can be discriminated against. So not only am I a woman of colour, I'm not as young as I look, but people think I'm a lot younger than I am. They always think I'm on work experience. I'm also Muslim, which brings in another intersection. And then obviously I'm queer. Like you, Mary, I did hide my queerness for the majority of my life, until I ended up coming out on breakfast TV because of the school protests that were going on in Birmingham. And now, like, I'm the most happiest I am. I guess I've got no choice, because I am so public, everyone knows who I am. But at the same time, I'm living my authentic truth. And I can't do that without recognizing that I'm queer, I'm a woman of color, I'm also a woman with faith. And all of those intersections are not mutually exclusive, right? They make me the leader I am. And I think all of us as queer people, we know what it's like to be othered. And I think that is the key thing about a feeling of belonging in the workplace. If I think from an internal comms perspective, you've got to build your brands from the inside out. You've got to nurture your internal teams that bring organizations to life. And that includes the queer community, that includes the LGBT community. So yeah, in terms of belonging, I think all organizations need to celebrate Pride like they do Christmas, like they do Easter or any other season. Seasonality is really important when it comes to marketing, and I think seasonality is an important part of the way we celebrate Pride in the workplace.
I think the discussion topic that's starting to come through about visibility is really interesting, and about kind of what you can choose to come out with if you feel safe. And also, especially if you're talking about, like, say, skin color, you can't choose, or, kind of your gender performance. I've actually had, through a lot of my career, people have almost tried to out me because what they've perceived me as. So actually, when a lot younger, I identified as cis and straight, and purely because of my appearance, a lot of people assumed I must be gay because I don't present in a typical feminine way. So a lot of people assumed that and asked me questions about, do you have a girlfriend? Which is just bizarre to dive in and ask very personal questions. I actually changed my name as part of my gender journey. I chose Charlie because it's gender neutral. Rumours were spread at my company that I must be transitioning to be a man. So it actually reached the board, and the CEO instructed the HR director to support me on my transition without having ever asked me. So on the one hand, I'm like, at least they were aware. I'm not entirely sure how much of that was out of care for me and how much was about kind of damage limitation of what would happen if they did it wrong. But it's just really bizarre that I've had in my life almost the other thing, in that people have been going, but you can't be straight, you can't be cis, you know, you don't look like a typical woman, kind of putting air quotes there that people can't see on the podcast. So it's so interesting how just the way you live your genuine self and how you appear can really affect that interaction. So back to the belonging theme, for me, I guess it's that people don't start to try and foist opinions or assumptions on me. They listen to who I am, they listen to what I choose to say and when, and that I feel comfortable kind of sharing me and having that received, I think, is what's really important.
It's a really interesting point, Charlie, because I kind of have the opposite, because I present as straight really easily. I think I think for me, I'm interested in the point that's coming out about the differences between visibility and invisibility, and also a little bit of what Saima was talking about. I work in a communications team. I'm quite protected from a lot of what my colleagues in the transport sector are going to be up against on the day-to-day, and I've noticed that difference so I know that there's a difference between me talking to my colleagues on Zoom, working on the things that I'm working on, which is like normally fairly corporate, and working with colleagues on, you know, various projects and bits and pieces is totally different to when you get the boots on and go on site. So that's when I really feel that sharpness, and it reminds me that I'm very lucky that a lot of the people that I work with are very inclusive, very open-minded, and I think National Highways is very supportive of a lot of queer culture, which is brilliant. And then there is still that moment, and I think that's what makes it difficult and what makes that sense of belonging really important, because you don't normally think that, you know, you necessarily want to surround yourself with people who like exactly the same books as you or the same anything else as you. So why would you need a network, or why would you need to talk to people who have got totally different experiences in life but have one aspect of their lives that they share with you, because it's only one part of everybody's identity. But actually it's that you end up leaning on when you have those interactions with people where they joke about, you know, well, you want to get my build around, or, you know, what did your husband think of this, that, and the other? Oh man, you know. So I think it's a really interesting one, that difference, and that how lots of us have that kind of, you're seen to be visible, but you have to kind of put your own boundaries out and go, well, actually, that's not quite right.
I follow up to that, please. It's a really, really good point that you've made around what does it feel like within corporate spaces where you perhaps have behaviours that are a bit more accepted and a bit more it just in a different space, I think, in those corporate environments versus perhaps being on the ground. Anybody, I think all of our experiences are valid here. What does it feel like when you're having to chop and change? And I can certainly speak from a race perspective, go from safe to non-safe environments. But what does that do to you when you're like, right, this is a good space and that's not a good space? Do you know? What do you look out for? Just what does that feel like on a daily basis?
I think all of us on this call probably know it in various ways. So in my personal life, it is as sharp as you're looking around going, is it safe for me to hold my wife's hand? And in a workspace, it actually makes it really complicated, because in a work environment, 99% of the time, people aren't going to come out with stuff like, you know, to excuse the pun, they're not going to say what they're really thinking, but there is a bit of there's just an extra little look, and it is a really tricky one, because it pulls on something in you that's quite deep and quite difficult, I think. So especially for those of us, it's been really interesting to talk to people who've come out later in life, or people who are a little bit older than a lot of the kind of queer folks that I tend to hang around with in other spaces, that we probably grew up in the 90s when it really wasn't acceptable, and it was different and in a totally different space. I think it's that pull of remembering how difficult it was in school, or, you know, the things that you were brought up with that were innocuous and nobody really meant anything by them, but still, even if you've been really sheltered, it pulls on something very difficult and deep inside everybody, I think, when you have to make that shift.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I guess I never really had that much of a choice. So I came out when I was 16, not as in bursting out of the closet to all of my family. That came a couple of years later. But I've been, you know, out and about, openly gay. Certainly I was out at sixth form college when I was 17, 18. And so actually since moving from my initial location on the underground where I worked as a guard to the Pink Depot, where I was a driver and I could just be out, I haven't really looked back, to be honest. And while I was there at that depot, and I was there for 8 years plus, I think, I met my now husband. We've been together 22 years. And I think in all honesty, it's very difficult to remain in the closet when you're with someone. I think when you're single, it's a bit easier, but you know, I'm no liar, and I think I've always felt comfortable because I've been in good environments since. If someone goes, you know, they'll glance down, they'll see the gold band, they're like, oh, what does your wife do? And I'm like, oh, actually, it's my husband, and he's ... And I think something that I reflect on is one of the reasons why I was so miserable at that very first location was people start putting 2 and 2 together, and I would say making 5, but they were actually making 4. They're like, oh, you know, young man, conversations often drift to, you know, which young women are attractive, or, you know, who in the media they fancy. And if you don't reciprocate or answer how they would expect, then they start to kind of raise eyebrows. Then he starts to get probing questions. Do you have a girlfriend? And where I'm single, I could go, no, I'm single. But I think the more that it becomes apparent you're holding something back and you're maybe being a bit evasive, the more curious people are and the more that they probe. And I find if you just lay out your stall and just say, you know, and it isn't a case of running into the room banging a drum. It's just like where the opportunity arises. Did you have a good weekend? Yeah, me and my husband went out for dinner. It was lovely. You know, you can just drop it in, move on. It's fine. It's cool. And I find the less of a deal you make of it, the easier it is. And I think in a big organisation like TfL with 30,000 people, to be honest with you, being the LGBTQ plus colleague network chair, I don't really have a choice anyway. Like I couldn't put myself in a closet even if I chose to. And I think the less embarrassed you seem about it and the more proud you seem of it, I think the less of an issue it makes it for other people. So I think now, certainly professionally at work, I've got no issue with it. Outside of work, entirely different story. If I'm around here walking my dog and I bump into another dog walker, and I won't lie, I make numerous judgments based on age and background and everything else. I have to make a judgment whether I think it's going to be safe to just drop my husband into the chat. And I still default not to. I still censor myself, check myself, because my learned behaviour from being on the receiving end of violence from strangers is you don't want to play that card unless you absolutely need to. So I think actually I feel far safer professionally. I feel far safer at work being myself and being authentic than I actually do outside of work when it comes to interacting with people that I don't really know, which I guess is quite an interesting twist on it. Testament obviously to the work that is done within the safety of organisations to make them safe spaces for people.
Thank you. I have a follow-up, but I want to come back to that later around safety. It's really interesting what you say, because it's testament to the work that's been done within the professional realm, and certainly within our sector, that we're in a space where people feel comfortable in some senses, or at least learning to be comfortable to be our true selves. And certainly from the intersectionality piece, the more intersections we have, the harder it is. But just to be able to be any sense of comfortable is great. And it saddens me when you talk about that juxtaposition between your own personal life and your professional life, and you're having to chop and change. So yeah, it's quite overwhelming when you hear that, and certainly from a race perspective, and being a female, I forget sometimes I'm a brown woman, but absolutely, like there are spaces physically where I think I can't leave at certain times of night, I can't go to certain places, and it does. And I've got a child as well, and I do think, can I go here? Hubby's with me. Oh, great, we can go everywhere we want to go now because I've got a man with me. And that really limits how you are. And if you add the other intersections that we have, it's horrible. It's really limiting. It's limiting to how you can be as a human being.
So I think for me, and the more public I get, and the more I do in terms of LGBT equalities work, I'm forever judging whether a space or a situation is safe or not. Now, to give you an example, I spoke about my race earlier. I was in a meeting last year, or maybe the year before, it was a planning meeting for the Commonwealth Games, a civic meeting with lots of leaders. Now, this meeting was specifically about diversity. So you'd think I'd be safe, right? I'd be in this safe space. Well, what was in the room? We had predominantly Black and brown cisgendered straight men. And one of them even went as far as to the extreme of cutting off everything I'd said because his cousin was gay and his opinion was more valid than mine. I don't think he'll ever make that mistake again. I made it clear why that wasn't okay. Not only was I the only woman, I was the only queer person. So it is difficult, I think, when you're at the intersection of a few different identities that are marginalized, because there's some places where you think you should be safe and then you go in and you're not, or I'm forever judging, you know, or should I go into this space? Should I not go into this space? I have a thick skin. I will always walk in there, but people who might be struggling with their mental health or having a bad day, you know, does that mean they're not going to apply for a job or they're not going to go for an interview? I think recruitment processes in the workplace play a really important part. And as somebody who is an employer of people or has been an employer of people, we have to understand that we have an unconscious bias when we're interviewing as well. And so if you have a queer person come in with a rainbow pin badge, for example, and you're not queer, are you going to judge them for that? You know, we need to open up these conversations, I think. Yeah, so I've brought it to the recruitment process because I just think that's an important part of the way we build brands from the inside out and the way we champion the workforce. And I do think queer people, and if you've got more intersections like myself, you will find it more difficult in interviews and to get those roles, to get the roles that you want to be in as well, in particular EDI roles. You know, queer people should be leading on the strategies of change. Okay, I'm really lucky to be working at Birmingham Pride, but there should be more of me. You know, Birmingham Pride is the only Pride in the UK that has an inclusive team of solid women, and we all represent different people across society, and we're all doing great things. So yeah, I just wanted to come to that recruitment process, but also just to recognize that everyone's different. A safe space for you, Melissa, might be different to a safe space I have, or you, Joe, or Holly, or Charlie, or you, Shireen. Like, it's different, and we just need to make sure there's always nuance in the conversation. And just because you might like something, it just might not work for everyone else. So just be flexible.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you kind of took it back to that breadth, because certainly from the women transport perspective and these conversations, it's about just highlighting what those intersections really mean. And yeah, it's different for different people, and that is exactly what we want to unpick, is that there's no cut and paste to what a human being looks like and what kindness can we bring to us to accept everyone, because you're never going to step in every single person's shoes, because that's just the numbers. It's impossible, right? But does it mean that we don't be kind? Does it mean that we don't like show curiosity in the right and you know, appropriate ways? Does it mean that we don't show the same love that you would expect for yourself to other people? And these sound like really obvious things. Why would you choose not to be kind, right? But we also know from our own experiences, and because of the nature of the way human beings work, we're not always as kind as we hope to be, and we do show those biases. And actually, one of our next podcasts, great plug, Saima, is going to be on recruitment and inclusive recruitment, exactly for what you've just described. So yeah, really, really interesting, because a lot of it is unconscious, but does that mean that it's okay? Not, right?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I consider it very much from the other side of things, is the choice of kind of where I want to work. And we've kind of discussed when you're in different spaces, you choose where's safe to go. Joe, I think it's fantastic. You absolutely feel like really, really safe at work. I'm sorry that you kind of don't outside, but as you kind of highlighted, you can kind of choose your work environment, and, you know, you switch depot, you can enact that. So I found it really interesting throughout my career in that I didn't actively start choosing kind of specifically diverse organizations, I don't think, because I wasn't aware of how much I needed it. Because all through school I was studying science and maths, I was surrounded by majority men, went to university, exactly the same. So then when I ended up working engineering in a bus company, that was just the environment I was used to. So it was just keep chugging along. And it was honestly the first Women in Transport event that I went to that, like, the penny dropped, and I felt like a physical weight drop off my shoulders, because it was like, oh wow, I didn't realize how much of, not a pretense or an act, but something was going on, that I was protecting myself, and I wasn't surrounded by people that totally got me. So I had to work hard to translate everything I was saying and thinking into that audience I was talking to. So being surrounded by people now, I'm further along in my journey and I'm entering more queer spaces. Again, it's this joy of, like, I don't have to explain what they them pronouns means. Like, these people know, they just get it. I feel so welcome. They're fantastic. And it's something that I'm doing a lot more in my spare time, and understanding how I can navigate that at work. I'm really, really lucky. Part of the reason I chose to work at UK Power Networks is the innovation team is so welcoming and inclusive and diverse, and it is a joy to work there. So, and I kind of got there by asking the right questions and moving towards the right space. But I think especially people early in their career or in certain industries, if you don't have the right connections, it can be really hard to ask the right questions and find a truly welcoming space. One of the best pieces of advice one of my friends gave me is a job interview, ask, what are you doing about diversity and inclusion? What's your organization's thoughts? Everyone always will say, yes, of course we care. So I used to think this a non-question, but he pointed out if they actually care, they'll follow up with examples. They'll be able to demonstrate it. And so it's listening to answer and understanding, are they rainbow washing, as we've touched on, I think in sort of prior conversations around pride and how that's demonstrated. But does an organization actually care? Do they demonstrate and follow through all year round, not just when they're talking about pride or looking to recruit someone? Do you guys have any examples, maybe of any things you can demonstrate or know of organizations that you can say that's maybe why you chose that direction, or what you think made a real impact there?
I think I'll jump in if that's okay, Charlie. So yeah, I think when I joined COWI, which is a Danish run company, nearly 2 years now, and when I was with my previous employer, I was looking for change to more open-minded thinking and some sort of more diversity and inclusion, and that was front of my mind when I was choosing my next employee, and that's probably the first time I've made that my priority rather than career progression, financial, and it was a real, like you say, it was a real good learning curve for me when I was reaching out and starting a journey on interviews, getting to know companies, and by either asking questions or, better than that, companies being really open about what they do in that space. It enabled me to make a decision to work in a company that I felt comfortable to be more open in. So yeah, I'd highly recommend people to put that on their agenda if they are searching for a new career or a new place to work, because I think where it comes with age or experience, that becomes more important. And listening to Joe's journey, that it makes a huge difference to you if you can work for a company with that frame of mind. So that's me.
But I think actually, to put a positive spin on it, so I've never felt compelled to leave. I've never felt, certainly not for the vast majority of the 26 years, it's never felt hostile. So I've never felt the need to leave. And I think, maybe, just listening to Polly, there probably are quite a few things I haven't even really given a second thought, because I'm just so institutionalized and I don't know any better or any different. But when I reflect, I think a lot of those good things, like ensuring that the colleague network groups are there when people first join us and are grads and apprentices, get introduced to us, all of that good stuff is what good looks like. So I think, the fact that I am a lifer 26 years later is a good sign.
So in Birmingham Pride this year, we had 8,000 people in our parade. That's now one of the biggest parades outside of Europe. And the majority of people marching in the parade are marching with their workplaces. We have a feedback survey every year, and over 85%, I think it's more, but it's definitely 85. We're going to delve a bit more into the questions this year, so hopefully we'll get a bit more of a full-rounded overview. But generally, over 85% people marching in the parade take pride that their companies are inviting them to march at Pride, are making them feel valid, are celebrating them. And I promise you, before I joined Pride and before I worked at Pride, I didn't know what it even meant to people about being in a parade. I never really interacted with prides myself. I was an indie festival kid. I was more busy camping than going to Pride. But it's really astounded me and surprised me and humbled me as well to understand how important the Pride parades are. Now, I understand there's an element of what people might call pink washing or rainbow washing. I am a marketing person, so I will always champion for seasonality and the celebration of seasonality, because it gives you the opportunity to build external customer bases and nurture your internal staff that bring businesses to life. And the only reason I will always champion the commercialization of Pride is because we are still discriminated to this day. And in this country, unfortunately, in the UK at the moment, some of the hate is coming from the state. You know, we are getting state implemented transphobia against the trans community. And it was a similar government under Margaret Thatcher that brought in Section 28 that meant civil servants weren't allowed to, whatever this means, promote homosexuality. I mean, I guess in that instance, you wouldn't even be able to be out at work because you'd be seen to be promoting homosexuality. So I think, I guess because I'm so in Pride, and like that is my life now, that is my existence. I guess I can see the importance of it and seeing how important workplaces joining Pride and the parades, how much it uplifts the community. And I've been with young people who are telling me it's their first Pride. I've been with pensioners who are telling me it's their first Pride, and they always have the same face of joy, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, like we said about seasonality, but it does work sometimes just by prompting conversations and really taking people on that journey. And I guess in some senses around your intention, how you then back that up with action. But the question I'd like to ask now, and hopefully Holly, you can jump in on this as well, is around what does allyship mean in all of this? Like, what does it mean for somebody who's not of that community to turn up, show up, be a friend, be an ally?
I think that it is, you know, colleagues recognising when you might be in an uncomfortable place or feel uncomfortable or be in a situation where you're sharing something, and recognising that, and then being there to, you know, follow up with a situation or a conversation that, you know, continues to make you feel very relaxed and open about what you're sharing. I think that's, you know, that's important. People asking the simple questions about your, you know, your partner, or when you, you know, when you've shared some of your personal life and what you've done at the weekend, or on a, you know, I spend quite a bit of time also in work, but staying away with people from work, so you get to know each other quite well. So, you know, people always taking that time to ask, you know, how you are, how things are, so you're able to share things that you've probably not shared for years, so, you know, you may stay quiet on. I think that's important to me, and sort of from a more in a day-to-day work perspective, one thing that has been a realization to me is when you do open up, and I get invited to be in sessions like this, the contacts you get back from people, you know, saying how great it was to see somebody be more open. Quite often, if you're in a more senior role and, you know, it's a bit more male dominated, or, you know, white dominated, whatever it may be, and that's been something that I've really enjoyed, and continues to make you realise that, you know, this is a difficult space for people to be more open in. But more recently, working in the environment I've been in, which has been much more diverse than what I've been used to, I've witnessed situations where I've worked with women of colour who get incorrectly called by somebody else's name because they happen to be the same colour, but they're wildly different in every single way. You know, and I've witnessed people not, you know, some people correcting it, some people not, and had those conversations, you know, and I've felt uncomfortable witnessing it, never mind being the person. And I know, you know, it's put me in a space where I'm more immediate with my response to that on behalf of that. You know, if it happens too often now for me, where somebody will be called the incorrect name because they've been mistaken for that person, and the only common denominator is their colour. So, you know, I'll say, oh, excuse me, you know, that is, you know, whoever, when I can see the other person is potentially uncomfortable. And we've had that chat about, is that okay? You know, because I'm learning myself. Is that okay for me to step in and say that, and just make sure if you are supporting that, you know, supporting in the right way.
What if somebody was using like the wrong pronouns? Would you correct somebody? How would you feel in that? And
I think I've made an agreement with myself that whether it's me or somebody else, in the moment, I'm going to make, you know, have that conversation, because I think for, you know, in time gone by or in different situations where I feel even uncomfortable myself or uncomfortable about whether I say the right thing or not, I'll have stayed silent and address it afterwards. And I think now I'll just address it in the moment. And I think one of my biggest learning points with some of my colleagues has been having these discussions, and we've had some great discussions in our senior leadership team around the people feeling really uncomfortable to have discussions about diversity and inclusion, and because they feel ignorant, they feel they don't know, so they don't ask because they feel embarrassed to ask. So we've had some great conversations to say it's absolutely okay to ask. You know, if you don't know or you're not sure, let's make this an environment where whatever you want to ask, you ask. And it's, you know, this is learning for us all, so it's not embarrassing. You're not going to offend anybody. It's better to have these conversations. So I know in a number of our senior leadership meetings, you quite often will have a health and safety moment or a values moment. So we make sure we have a diversity or inclusions moment where we have these discussions and people share experiences or situations that have made them awkward, and ask, you know, what is the right, you know, what should I do there? Is it okay for me to say that? And that's been great for us all, I think, because, you know, I'm certainly on a learning curve like everybody else. Really keen to continue to contribute in conversations like this whenever I can, and it allows me to meet some fantastic people on this screen that I've never met before, and, you know, hear stories and just thinking about the complex nature of having a number of intersections, as I think you called it, is, you know, mind-blowing to me. You know, when I think about you breaking through that, you know, one barrier, another barrier, all at the same time. Wow. You know, I hold my hand up for you and leading the way in that. So we've all got a lot to learn in that space. So yeah, thank you, Shireen, for allowing me.
So what does allyship mean? So to me, it means being curious and asking questions. And so, I mean, clearly it's not a one-way street. I'm not looking at other people to be allies to me. I need to be allies to other people in turn. And so I actually learned a lot during the Black Lives Matter period of protest back in 2020. My best friend is a cis straight black guy. And it is just interesting how much pent up anguish, torment, opinions lie just beneath the surface that people are typically too polite almost to disclose. And it's only actually once you start to be curious and ask the right questions with an open mind that you do start to unlock all of this stuff. And it is amazing how much, because of our identities, and obviously everyone is different because everyone's got different intersections and different experiences, it's just amazing how much is just below the surface. And I think just asking the right questions and just listening with an open mind is, like, to me, that is the absolute crux of it. And I think to do that, you need to get out of your comfort zone. So to hear some of my best friend's opinions as a cis white guy, middle-aged, privileged. I mean, I tick every privilege box apart from being gay, basically. So I know, and I am very, very aware of that. And so to hear some of the things that he had to say about his experiences and, you know, historic treatment at the hands of white people, it does make you feel uncomfortable, and you need to be prepared to hear that, and you need to be prepared to not get defensive and not take it personally. It's not personal, but if you ask the question, be prepared to hear the answer. And I think one other thing, I think Saima actually touched on this beautifully. The example at the conference, the planning meeting, where someone was basically, oh, my cousin's gay, so I'm now the world expert in, like, being gay. It's this whole thing about just don't share autobiographical examples just because you know a gay person or you got a gay person in your family. It doesn't mean that you're like the expert. So just still keep that open mind. Don't kind of and it is this unconscious bias. It's like you start to project your biases. You think you know what a gay person should look like. Therefore, Charlie, you had your experiences of people just making assumptions. You fit my kind of copybook bill of what a gay woman looks like. Therefore, I'm just going to impose that on you and ask you like really inappropriate questions. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's a bit about, to me, what being an ally should be. But I think as much as it's important asking the questions, don't put all the burden on the individual to educate you. Like, we've got Google for a reason. Just go and do your research. If you want to be a good ally, meet someone halfway, do your research. I mean, obviously be cautious about the links that you follow, but do a bit of research and then follow up with questions. Because so it is really tiring. I think in particular, and I hear this a lot from our members who are trans or non-binary, they're just tired. They're constantly, and it's people asking questions from a very well-meaning place, but they're just tired of constantly having to educate everyone else all of the time. It's just like really, really wearing. So I think people need to take more responsibility to educate themselves. So those are my thoughts on allyship. And just to, while I have the mic, to cover the question of pronouns, I think absolutely I do correct people, and I correct myself. I've made mistakes. It's natural and normal and excusable, and I think it's fine just to, yeah, I mean, it is embarrassing, granted, but it's fine just to own that and go, oh, that was a bit awkward, and then just move on. So I'm very happy to correct people, and I personally, what I try to do is role model using neutrality if I don't know any different. So clearly, if someone sent me an email and they've helpfully stated the pronouns, then I know what their preference is. But if I don't know, I use they or them. And I know that might not necessarily be their pronoun of choice, but my assumption, hopefully I'm not wrong, is that is preferable than misgendering someone totally. So I think, yeah, it's fine to be in that space, be prepared to be a bit awkward. And I think it's how you correct, how you challenge. There's just ways of doing it. So those are my thoughts. And I think, you know, if I can't do it as like the chair of the LGBTQ plus group, then who can? So I think, yeah, I mean, there is a responsibility to role model getting it right. So I think those are my thoughts on those two matters.
I've accidentally, Joe's lined up a loads of stuff that leads on to the thoughts that I was having about allyship and about pronouns, which are very similar. I was asked to do a presentation talking to people about what can you possibly do as an ally, and I had a few really practical suggestions, but they tie back to some of the things Joe's been talking about. My first suggestion to everybody was to go to a pride. It doesn't matter if you are LGBT or not. Go along, and the reason I say that is not just like, you know, come and join us under the rainbow umbrella, because that's an obvious, but also if you look at the statistics of people who, and I'm doing air quotes, don't believe in or don't support LGBTQIA plus rights, they generally haven't met people who are non-binary or trans or queer, or use all of these like confusing and difficult language, you know, in inverted commas again. So go and talk to people, even if you don't live in a great big city. There are prides everywhere. Just go along and like join the community. And I think actually making connections with people and seeing people join in this stuff makes you feel like, well, you can be part of it as well. And also it breaks down that barrier of, well, I don't know anybody who ... That's my first one. My second one is the idea of pride being something you can do at work, in your job, as well as something with a sticker on. So I waved my little flag as part of the committee, but when I talked to my communications directorate, I said, guys, can we talk about how we do representation in photography, or how we do representation in, you know, where are, you know, the things that we can make a tangible difference on. So it's not just about kind of coming and like putting a rainbow on top of everything. It's like looking at the way you work and how you can make that more inclusive, rather than just like plonking something on top of it, which makes it easier for people actually, because then they can go, oh, I see, it's that simple, or I never realized that was something that would be useful. So that's really helpful to put that lens on it. The third one I have about allyship is a really practical suggestion, which is that people could go and read the Rainbow Britain report by Stonewall. A lot of people are still making, and we all do it, you know, I studied physics A-level poorly, and most of the things that I learned are now wrong, like factually wrong. And I think actually what we all have to come to terms with is things are moving and changing around all the time. And a lot of people's predispositions towards this is what the LGBT community is, does, says, these are the statistics, are just bang out of date. And I'm, you know, you think of it, oh, I'm one of like 2% or whatever. Read that report. Life is changing. It will make you feel less lonely if you're part of this community, and it will make you feel much more easy about things if you're not part of that community and don't feel like you understand it. So that's a really practical one. I think that leads on to what I wanted to come back to Joe's point about how you can broker those conversations with people. The point that I've made previously on these similar kind of calls and stuff is the idea of calling people in rather than calling people out. So I listened to a really interesting podcast on the BBC. I think it was Alistair Heather was doing, am I that guy? Like, am I the guy who's being unreasonable to women and not realise it? Or am I witnessing it and I don't know how to say to people, don't behave like that, it's upsetting, it's disrespectful, whatever. And it pertains back to Joe's point again about awkwardness. So I think my practical suggestion is you can couch it as, this isn't how we behave in this organisation, rather than you made a mistake or you're doing something wrong. So here's the precedent, you're just a little way off at the moment, dude. So come back in, because this is how people behave with each other, is a really nice way of doing it. And it makes it easier if you can take some of the pressure off the people who are most marginalised to have those conversations. So if you're a straight ally, can you please sometimes be the awkward one who goes, hold on a second, what about LGBT issues in this conversation? That's great. And if you have privilege, I have privileges, recognise them and offer your privilege in the use of other people who might need it. So if I have trans or non-binary colleagues, I think it will be helpful if I have a conversation with someone about, please use these pronouns for me, and that's what this means, because then my trans colleague doesn't have to have that same frigging conversation 6 times in a week. So if I can lighten that burden a little bit and we can share it all around, brilliant. You just pass it down the ladder. And I think that's a really practical way to be an ally. And that is like my rounding suggestion is, it can be something as simple as putting your pronouns on your email. So I have a little link that says, why is this here? And something that just goes, people can click on it. Then you can talk to me if you want to. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but it's just there. And it just becomes business as usual. And I think those things that move things onto, this is just the way we do things now, can help all that little bit. So yeah, that's my thought on pronouns. I always just pop them at the bottom of my emails and I introduce myself with them in meetings, and it just means that because I am cis and I present as female, it makes people think twice that you're not being, again, I'm not being the awkward one, you know, I'm not non-binary or trans and going, oh, well, excuse me, which is what some people still think. I'm saying it's just part of my identity, even though I'm a cis woman. So I think that can be helpful.
Holly literally took so many words out of my mouth.
Sorry.
Like, no, don't apologize at all. Like, it's so great to hear people talk about that, because as you've highlighted, like, such an important thing for pronouns and emails is a great example, is it normalizes it. Joe's, you do, and you're really good practice, introduce yourself with pronouns first, because when people hear my pronouns are, they're like, if they're not that inclined, they might think, oh, is it going to be they? Is it going to be difficult? Oh, okay, he's a he. Oh, I'll start doing that. And then when someone does choose to lead with their pronouns, it's not seen as kind of an odd one out kind of thing. And it as you said, totally normalizes that practice. And personally, as someone who uses kind of both she and they pronouns, I'm totally happy with both. A lot of people do default to she, that's fine, but I do see pronouns in other people's emails as I know they're likely to be more of a safe person. They're on that wavelength. So it's something I've put on mine for as long as I kind of could, from when it kind of started back years ago, because I always think, who is that helping make feel safe? Because they know, they can see. So I think that's a really important thing. As you said, it's that showing up, that allyship is supporting people from normalizing behaviors. And as you said, I am definitely that person in so many meetings at work and situations. It's like, oh, actually, can we do it this way? Because you should be more considerate of that. And I'm happy to do that, as you said, using privilege, but it can get quite lonely being that person. And also it does then mean some people might roll their eyes and go, oh, they're off on one again. Whereas when more voices pop up across the room, you have a variety of people challenging, thinking, and catching things. As we've said before, just because I have visibility of kind of, especially the LGBTQIA spectrum, I try to educate myself. There's things I'll miss, and having other people approaching that reduces that workload, means it's not all one person, and it means that we're all moving in the right direction. So I think they're really, really important things, and it does just, as I mentioned earlier, that weight off the shoulders. Being in a meeting and being able to say something and have other people go, yeah, I care about that too, and there's this element of it, where it becomes a conversation instead of a lecture. Everyone enjoys that more then, because also people then sometimes feel more comfortable challenging you if there's then other voices and different ones, and you can have a real in-depth exploration rather than, yeah, someone saying, I think it should be this way, and the people that are uncertain and don't want to ask questions just go off and do it because they feel they should and they don't want to be told off. Because if, you know, people are changing their behavior through fear, you're not winning them over, you're just teaching them a certain behavior they try to follow. And that's not kind of a great way to go with it. In terms of my opinions on pronouns, as I said, I'm she or they, happy with both. I find it fascinating and usually quite funny now how many people freak out around me and my pronouns, because my hair's short from the back, because I've worked in engineering. I've been mistaken for a man so many times in my life. And what surprises me is some people look like really distraught when they realise I'm not a cis male. And the fear in their eyes, and they think I'll be upset, they immediately go to apologize, and it's like, I don't mind. Personally, I'm a non-binary woman, but because I see gender as a spectrum, I don't think it's a problem to be mistaken as a man. It's not an issue for me. So I find it interesting how it's so ingrained in our culture to be an insult if you don't perform to the kind of gender assigned at birth. And I think some of that then does tie into trans people as well, because they're exploring their gender performance. They choose to, kind of how they perform their gender and how they identify is a really complex thing that there's a lot of people really exploring out there. Whereas kind of a lot of the population just think we're a man or a woman, you can be either, and you must look in that box. So I think it's interesting how pronouns and the way there's a lot of people leading the way and making that conversation a lot more nuanced. And how you go about it. So I'm quite easy about it, but I'm also very mindful of other people aren't. So it is also that sensitivity. There's no need to look afraid if you make a mistake, if you misgender someone. I've had friends transition. I've changed my name myself. It is hard to break a habit of a lifetime. You know, my parents called me Emily for 25 years, I think. And then when I was like, can you call me Charlie, please? It takes a while. There's mistakes, there's accidents, and it's that realizing that as long as you're not doing it on purpose and you are making an effort to try, I will never challenge someone, and I'll never be angry if, you know, they slip up and make a mistake. But it is also, I'm going to add, important you do demonstrate you're making an effort. One thing I noticed when I changed my name, it was one of my older companies, I could tell if someone had changed my name in their phone or not. Because when you answer the phone, you're on default mode. And so they're like, hello, Emily. You haven't changed the name to Charlie in your phone, have you? Oh, no, I haven't. Some people did it for months. And it's that thing where it's like, well, how hard are you trying if you can't do that one little action? And just by doing those little actions, you'll be amazed how quickly it switches. And some people now go, I can't believe I ever called you anything else. So I've obviously kind of conflated names and pronouns there, but for me, they're quite similar in a way, because I see a pronoun as it's a handle, it's how you're known, it's how you pass through the world. And I think that's why a lot of people do find it very important. And I think you need to recognize the respect that kind of carries to respect someone's pronouns, and why I think some people that don't understand and recognize that sometimes challenge with, well, why do I need to do it? I think that's the kind of level of importance, and that ties nicely back into allyship, I suppose, is doing that little effort to show that respect and try and help people out.
Thank you for that, Charlie. Absolutely agree with everything you're saying. And I'm going to start with pronouns. And I'm a cisgendered woman, which means I was a woman I was born a woman and I identify as a woman. Now, I'm not trans, I'm not non-binary. Does that mean I can't understand, what it's like to be othered? Does that mean I can't understand what it's like to be othered in the workplace as a woman or a woman of color or as a queer person? So I think what I just want to remind everyone, especially in the workplace, is that by you showing pronouns on your email signature, for example, might just make somebody who's suffering with poor mental health that day feel seen. You might stop someone committing suicide. You might stop someone just leaving that place of work. You just might give somebody a reason to survive that day. So pronouns are really important. I'm cisgendered, so it doesn't make any difference to me whether somebody has a pronoun or not, because I stereotypically look the gender that I identify with, right? But we really must respect non-binary and trans people. So in every meeting, if you're hosting a meeting, start the meeting by sharing your pronouns. If you have frontline teams, go as far as changing the name tags. Encourage everyone to have their pronouns, but explain to them why it's important. And Charlie, this is like the reason I'm pushing for this. I'm a cisgendered woman. We need to lead change when it comes to non-binary and trans identities. Every day is a day of learning for me. I learn something new, and I think we can all do that. So I think we really need to recognize how important pronouns are. And like Charlie and everyone else has said, you might not get it right all the time. You might misgender someone, but surely you've got the basic human skills and common sense to see if you've called someone something and they're feeling a bit uncomfortable. You should be able to recognize that as a professional person. And if you do, then it's okay, just say sorry and don't make the mistake again, or just try and be better. But just be open to learning. And pronouns are really not that evil. They're just a way. It's a bit like saying Mr., Ms., Doctor, whatever it is. I've always used Ms. In this patriarchal society for many reasons. And then just end with allyship. I think everything you're all saying is really important. I just want to come to the human factor. So when it comes to allyship, any form of allyship, there's always some kind of commonality. So for me, the commonality I speak about, especially when I'm speaking to young people in schools, is the commonality of class. I was privately educated. I refused to take a grammar school test. I don't know if I've even gone to grammar school, but I've never agreed with segregated education. I've never had the privilege of a segregated education, but I understand the commonality of the working classes. And the working classes are white, black, brown, we're every ethnicity, we're every sexuality, we're every gender. So in the workplace, if there's somebody you might not understand their identity, sexual orientation, gender, whatever it is, race, faith, try and find some kind of commonality. You all work in the same place. That's a commonality, right? And work with that commonality, and then try and find things, find pockets of joy within your workplace to celebrate together. But what you've got to do is make sure that you include the others in your workplace, and the others could be anyone. But are you arranging a lunch or a team outing? Are you going to be the person that creates cliques, or are you going to be the person that demolishes cliques? For me, authentic leadership demolishes cliques. Cliques don't exist in the workplace. They shouldn't exist in society. All they do is other people and make other people think that they're better than other people. So I think allyship, like everyone else has also said, is calling it out. Like I said to you guys about pronouns and about trans and non-binary identities, just because I'm not trans or non-binary doesn't mean I don't understand what it's like to be othered. And it's my job to speak out when somebody misgenders someone, or somebody's transphobic, or somebody says, oh, well, what is non-binary? Well, I'll explain it to them. I'm somebody who's happy to have that conversation and work with communities and bring communities with me on this journey. And there are lots of people in society and in your workplace that will want to do that. So just make sure you're asking the right people the right questions. And come on, we should all have enough common sense to know that if you're asking someone something and they feel uncomfortable, don't push it. But there will be someone else who will be willing to have that conversation with you. So just be open to debate. We're all different. Every day is a day of learning. And just because you're one way doesn't mean, you know, somebody else is invalid. I believe in God, and I believe that God put us all on this earth for a reason, and created us with all our differences for a reason as well. So, you know, let's just be nice people and try and advocate for equality and inclusion in the workplace. That's what it comes down to. Just be nice.
I think I mean, very basically, it's about having no fear. And I think, you know, ultimately, whatever you're scared of, be it insults or violence or a dirty look or, you know, however that looks, ultimately it is just, and I guess in a word, it is safety still. So it's just, and I think, yeah, I probably did articulate this earlier to a different point, but it is just being able to be yourself, just be authentic, not have to censor yourself, and have no fear that that will attract any kind of unwelcome attention from anyone. And it absolutely is a mutual thing. And I think different communities clearly all have different experiences to each other, but I would argue that there is almost, and I don't mean to be too binary about it, but there is almost a common enemy. And right now that is the whole anti-woke movement. There is definitely a tide that's pushing back. And I think we collectively, irrespective of what our background is, we're so much stronger as a single united force against that. Because I can see it happening now. You can see, and I don't know if this is orchestrated or intentional, but you see a wedge being driven between trans women and women. It's getting, and of course this is not universal, certain sectors, but I think what the forces that we are up against want is to see division between us and see conflict between us. I think there's probably nothing that will scare them more than us all saying, like, we've had enough. And irrespective of our backgrounds, like, we're kind of sick of being othered, marginalized, having fewer opportunities. And I think that, to me, is what good allyship at a societal level looks like. It's just about calling it out at that level. And, you know, as Saima says, it is ultimately just being kind. It's about irrespective of your background, where you come from, how you identify, just a bit of common decency to each other. And so I think that to me is how it should look like when I step outside of the office. It doesn't always look like that. And I think society, to end personally for me on a kind of note of hope, despite all of the doom and gloom, I think society on every level, on every front, and I know that there is currently a bit of a step backwards with regards to trans rights, but there is this inexorable tide of things getting better, people becoming kinder, more understanding, better educated. I'm just filled with so much joy when I see how open-minded about gender identity younger people are, because it just reassures me that some of the struggles that people of our generation have had, people in the future are much less likely to have. And I think as long as I look around and I can see that to me shows that allyship is improving, increasing, and that's very good to see. There's still a huge amount of work to do, but I see it is moving the right way. So that's a positive to end on.
I'd just echo what Joe says. It's just great to be able to look around. My kids are getting to the age where they're going to secondary school, and the point at which I would have been worried about being beaten up, they've already had the conversations. They're just not interested in carrying on those preconceptions. And I think it's really important for those of us who are older, have been brought up with all of those preconceptions and conflating all those issues, that younger people don't necessarily carry the same hang-ups that we do. And on the same front, younger people sometimes just need to give a bit of a hat tip to the older generations of queer people who, you know, actually, if you did step out and you were beaten up every time you came out of a gay bar, you're going to have certain opinions. And I think it was really, I would echo Joe's thoughts on how kind of picking off different parts of the rainbow spectrum against each other is just the most disingenuous move. And I personally hate it as someone who is a cis gay woman. I think it's absolutely outrageous to try to divide people out like that. And that kind of none of us is free unless all of us are free type thing. Because if you look back at history, I mean, without even making it a political thing, if you look back at history, that is how every movement that has garnered change in this society has been accused of being on the fringes of society, or being extremist, or being, this, that, and the other. And trying to kind of like get people pulled off into one little pocket where you can ignore them is a very well rehearsed system. And it's just that's just a matter of fact. And I think that's it, taking some of the heat out of it, to say, actually, the way new ideas come in and the way that we change is by, it seems really out there, and then actually it's not very out there a little bit later. So there is absolutely no need for that kind of division. And it gives me great joy to see. I live right by a secondary school, and the kids walking past are just ace, and I think I weep for my 14-year-old self that I didn't get that. And I'm so pleased that my kids will get that kind of acceptance, and power to us that are trying to push it through to make sure that nobody has that kind of experience anymore.
I agree with everything you're saying, Holly, and everything you said, Joe. When we think about allyship, we're thinking about people who aren't queer, right? So I just want to share a little message for people who, might be watching this because they might not have ever interacted with an LGBT person before. They might not even know what LGBT or queer means. That's okay. Or you might just be curious. When we look at the workplace, workplaces are a depiction of society. So probability will dictate that at some point in your life, whether you like it or not, a family member or somebody within your community will come out as queer or gender diverse. So non-binary or trans. Now, I kind of think the workplace is a really important place where you can safely explore those conversations and have those conversations and set yourself up, because I can tell you from personal experience of queer people who've been in Birmingham, and lots of horrific stories I've heard, if the first interaction, a queer person or a gender diverse person, or just a queer person, right? Because non-binary and trans people are part of the queer spectrum. So if queer people, if somebody's coming out to you or telling you that they're different, their sexuality or gender is different to what you think, your first interaction could have a severe consequence. There have been people who have committed suicide. I'm a Pakistani Muslim. I know of Pakistani Muslims who have committed suicide because their parents have told them that they need conversion therapy, or they're a disease, or their existence is a disease. So at the end of the day, I exist, I'm not going anywhere. And other LGBT people will exist in your community. And, if you're Muslim and listening to this, or Christian, or somebody with faith, you don't even have to agree on our theological differences. I will look at the Quran very differently to somebody who may not agree that, being LGBT is Muslim. But all I can say to everyone is we exist. So there's no middle roundabout or middle island that we can just be shipped off to. We exist in the workplace, we exist in your communities, we exist in your places of worship. So you're going to have to be a bit open. And as I've said earlier, I've given you real life examples. If somebody in your community, friends or family, comes out as gender diverse or LGBT, then you really might push them to suicide. And is that really how you want to answer to God if you're a person of faith? So I guess use these workplaces as a positive place to debate and explore these questions. Find people like myself, if you're South Asian, for example, find someone like me, speak to me. I'm happy. I won't ever be offended. I will answer any question you have. But it's really important that we have these conversations, because there are real life consequences to homophobia and transphobia that people, straight people don't see. And you need to realize that. There's one thing you're going to take from this podcast and anything I've said is that, LGBT people are human just like you, and we've got to share this world we all live in. So you're not going to lose out on anything by being a nice person.
So true. I think I'd kind of summarize a lot of what you've all said is I think it's really important for allies to kind of remember the dark and the light side of LGBTQI, because a lot of LGBT plus people face, risks of violence, whether it is suicide due to their situation, or I remember a moment that it really clicked in my head years ago. A friend pointed out there's countries in the world he can't go on holiday to because if they find out he's gay, they will kill him. And that's, I think, a reality that a lot of straight people that haven't been in that situation don't necessarily consider. So there is that element of that potential everyday violence that does hover around the edges of a lot of queer people's lives. But the flip side is, as we also covered, is so much better. It's always getting better. People can be safer. They can be more supported. There are fantastic spaces out there. I'm personally really into like film and media. And I love the amount of representation. Sometimes it's problematic. There's not all that I want, but there are some absolutely sterling examples of queer people in film and cartoons, even made for kids in a super kid-friendly way. And, it's kind of, I think, sometimes exposing people as well to that bright side and that diversity, and watching films, consuming media, Googling to do a bit of research. There's so much out there that's rich to both educate yourself on, and I think a lot of people do learn a lot about themselves and how they interact with their sexuality and their gender from understanding how other people do. Even if you explore and come back to it and go, oh, I am cis and straight, it gives you that deeper understanding of yourself and how other people may differ. So I think there's that real richness that I think queer people bring to society that I think is really important to highlight as well.
I've been really moved by just the conversation, just your honesty, your openness. I think everyone just really, just your willingness to go really deep with these questions, and I really appreciate the time. And it's quite funny when we speak about the podcast and we're going into really deep life conversations. You've got an hour and a half, or you've got an hour in some cases, just to go into your innermost deep thoughts as a human being. And so I'm just honoured that you've all brought yourselves to this conversation for that, and I'm humbled. And to anyone listening, if you any comments or any questions, obviously feel free to contact us and post and all the rest of it. And there'll be more and more podcasts we'll be discussing great stuff now.
You've been listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Join us next time as we hear more from the women in our sector. Please visit the website for more details on how to become a member of Women in Transport, and remember to like, follow and share this podcast.